My name is Elena. I am 35 years old. I am a wife and a mother of 2 children. When I got married, I believed in simple ideas about life. I believed in love, trust, and growing old together with one person. I believed that if 2 people tried hard enough, they could build a happy life. In the beginning, everything felt right. My husband smiled at me every morning during breakfast. Sometimes he held my hand when we walked outside. He listened when I talked about my day. We shared small dreams. Maybe one day we would buy a little house. Maybe we would plant flowers in a garden and watch our children grow up together. Back then, the future felt bright and peaceful. When my first child was born, my whole world changed. It was a boy. I remember holding him in my arms for the first time. He was so small and quiet. At night I stayed awake and watched him breathe. I whispered promises he could not understand. "I am here," I told him softly. "I will always be here for you." Those first months were not easy. I slept very little. My body felt tired almost every day. But every time my son smiled at me, all the tiredness disappeared. My husband tried to help in the beginning. He did not know much about babies, but he tried. Sometimes he changed diapers slowly and carefully. Sometimes he walked around the room at night while holding the baby so I could sleep. He often said, "We are doing this together." And I believed him. 7 months later, I became pregnant again. When my second child arrived, life became even busier. Now I had 2 children who needed me every moment. The house was always noisy. One child was crying while the other one was calling my name. I woke up early every morning before everyone else. I prepared breakfast, cleaned the house, washed clothes, and cooked meals. Day after day, the routine repeated again and again. At night, after everyone was asleep, I sometimes sat quietly for a few minutes. Those quiet moments were the only time I felt like myself. Slowly, my husband began to change. He stopped asking how I felt. He stopped sitting close to me on the couch. Instead, he sat across the room with his phone in his hand. If I talked about something, he listened with half attention. When I showed him a drawing our son made at school, he nodded and said, "That's nice." Then he looked back at his phone. I tried to tell myself this was normal. Maybe all marriages go through difficult times. Maybe we were just tired from raising 2 small children. One evening, I asked him for help. "Can you help me give the children a bath tonight?" I asked. He sighed. "I worked all day," he said. "I'm very tired. I just want to relax." I wanted to say something back. I wanted to tell him that I had also worked all day taking care of the children and the house. But I stayed quiet. So I bathed the children alone. I dried their hair and carried them to bed. By the time I turned off the light in their room, my arms felt heavy. Moments like that began happening more and more. Sometimes I cooked my husband's favorite dinner, but he ate silently without saying thank you. Sometimes I asked if we could talk after the children slept, but he said he was too tired. Once I reached for his hand while we were watching television. He gently moved his hand away. It was not anger. It was distance. Slowly, I began to feel invisible inside my own home. Money also became tight. We had enough for food and rent, but nothing extra. When I bought clothes, I always bought them for the children first. Shoes for them. School supplies for them. Warm jackets for winter. I wore the same clothes again and again. When people noticed, I smiled and said, "I just like these clothes." But that was not true. One afternoon, I stopped in front of a shop window. There was a beautiful blue dress inside. For a moment, I imagined wearing it. I imagined walking outside and feeling confident again. Then my daughter held my hand. "Mama, I'm hungry," she said. I looked at the dress one last time and walked away. I never went back. Sometimes late at night, when the house was quiet, I imagined a different life. I imagined packing a bag and leaving. But those thoughts never lasted long, because my children needed me. One evening my husband and I had a small argument in the kitchen. "You never listen to me," I said quietly. "And you never understand me," he replied. We were not shouting. We were just two tired people standing in the same room. Suddenly a small voice spoke behind us. "Mom, Dad, are you fighting?" It was my daughter. I did not know she was standing there. I quickly forced a smile. "No, sweetheart," I said. "We're just talking." But I could see fear in her eyes. Later that night, she climbed into my bed and held my arm. "Are you and Daddy going away?" she asked softly. My heart broke. I hugged her tightly and said, "No, everything is okay." She fell asleep in my arms, but I stayed awake the entire night. That night I realized something important. My children were watching us. They were learning what love looked like by observing their parents. And I did not want them to grow up feeling scared. From that moment, I stopped thinking about leaving. I stayed. Years passed. School mornings, homework evenings, doctor visits, birthday cakes. Life continued moving forward. My husband and I still lived in the same house, but it often felt like we lived in different worlds. We talked about schedules and bills, but never about feelings. One afternoon my son asked me a question. "Mom, why don't you go out with your friends?" I paused. Then I realized something surprising. I did not really have friends anymore. "I'm fine," I told him. Later I looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked tired. My eyes looked older. For a moment I wondered when I had stopped living for myself. But then my daughter called from the living room. "Mama, can you help me with my homework?" And I walked away from the mirror. Years later, my children became more independent. One evening my daughter hugged me and said something that stayed in my heart. "Mom, you always made me feel safe." I smiled and hugged her back. But inside I asked myself a quiet question. Who had made me feel safe? Now when people ask me why I stayed, I give a simple answer. I stayed for my children. And that is true. My children grew up feeling loved. They grew up in a stable home. But there is another truth that I carry quietly in my heart. In choosing that life for them, I slowly lost the woman I used to be. Still, every choice has a cost. And this was mine.